The contract fell from my trembling hands like a death sentence, its crisp white pages scattered across the marble floor of the Blackwood mansion like broken dreams. I stared at the document that had just shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. There it was, in black and white, the brutal truth I had been too blind to see for 5 years. My signature at the bottom, young and hopeful, agreeing to be paid $50,000 annually to pretend to be Madison Blackwood's boyfriend. A transaction, a business deal, nothing more. The mansion felt suffocating as I knelt there, gathering the pages with shaking fingers. Every corner of this place held memories I thought were real, moments I believed had meaning. The grand staircase where Madison had kissed me on our first fake anniversary, the library where she'd fallen asleep on my shoulder while I helped her study, the garden where I'd foolishly imagined proposing to her someday. All of it was a lie. Mr. Rivers. The voice belonged to Harrison, the head butler who had always treated me with the perfect balance of respect and condescension that came with serving the hired help. Miss Madison has requested that you pack your belongings. She's indisposed at the moment. Indisposed? Of course she was. She was probably upstairs with Alexander Sterling, the golden boy who had returned from his failed music career to reclaim what he'd always considered his property, the childhood sweetheart, the real love of her life, the one who never had to sign a contract to be worthy of her attention. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. Through the tall windows, I could see the perfectly manicured gardens where I'd spent countless hours reading to Madison, believing her smiles were genuine, her laughter real. The gazebo where she'd told me she felt safe with me, was that in the contract too? Had her father Coax checked her on exactly what to say to keep me compliant? The truth hit me like a physical blow. Madison had never chosen me, she'd never even seen me as a choice. I was just another service her father had purchased, like the housekeepers, the gardeners, the drivers, a companion to keep her entertained and away from the bad influences while she waited for her real prince to return. My phone buzzed, a text from Madison. Ethan, something came up with Alex. Handle the charity meeting tomorrow, you know what to say. Handle it, like I'd handled everything else in her life for 5 years while she treated me like an employee, because that's exactly what I was. I looked around the mansion one final time, at the life I'd thought I was building, the future I'd imagined with a woman who had never seen me as anything more than a convenient accessory. My reflection stared back at me from the hallway mirror, and I barely recognized the man looking back. Where was the ambitious finance student who'd dreamed of changing the world? Where was the young man who'd once believed he could achieve anything, buried under 5 years of playing a role in someone else's story? But not anymore. I pulled out my laptop and began typing. Applications to international business schools, resignation letters, plans for a life that would finally be mine. Madison Blackwood could keep her contract, her money, and her precious Alexander Sterling. Ethan Rivers was done being anyone's hired boyfriend. 5 years ago, I was Ethan Rivers, the scholarship kid from Queens with a 4.0 GPA in finance and a burning ambition to revolutionize Wall Street. I was 22, hungry for success, and desperate enough to accept William Blackwood's proposition when my mother's cancer treatments drained every penny we had. My daughter needs guidance, he'd said in his pristine Manhattan office, sliding the contract across his mahogany desk. She's brilliant, but distracted. Her relationship with the Sterling boy is destructive. I need someone who can redirect her focus, help her reach her potential. I'd stared at the numbers on that contract. $50,000 a year, plus room and board at the family estate, full healthcare coverage, and a promise of graduate school funding. When the arrangement ended, it was more money than my family had ever seen, more than enough to save my mother's life. What exactly would I need to do? I'd asked, though I already knew I'd sign whatever he put in front of me. Be her companion, her study partner, her... He'd paused, choosing his words carefully. Boyfriend, if necessary. Someone stable, ambitious, with proper values, someone who can show her what a real relationship looks like. The Blackwood estate in the Hamptons was like stepping into another world. 40 rooms, staff quarters, a private beach, and enough wealth displayed in every corner to fund a small country. Madison's wing of the house was larger than the apartment I'd shared with my mother, filled with designer clothes, expensive artwork, and the casual luxury of someone who'd never wanted for anything. Madison herself was everything her father had promised, and nothing I'd expected. At 21, she was stunningly beautiful, with honey-colored hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to see through everything except, apparently, me. She was also spoiled, impulsive. and completely unprepared for the real world despite her Ivy League education. "So you're my new babysitter," she'd said when we first met, looking me up and down with the casual assessment of someone evaluating a purchase. "Daddy thinks you can save me from my terrible choices." She wasn't wrong. Alexander Sterling had been her obsession since childhood, a trust fund brat who collected broken hearts like trophies and treated Madison like another possession to be claimed when convenient. Their relationship was toxic, dramatic, and completely consuming. She'd skip classes to follow him to parties, cry for days when he ignored her, and make increasingly desperate attempts to win his attention. My job was to be the alternative, the steady, reliable choice who would slowly win her over with consistency and genuine care. What William Blackwood hadn't counted on was that I would fall for his daughter completely and utterly, contract or no contract. Living in the Blackwood mansion was like being a well-dressed servant with benefits. The staff treated me politely but distantly, knowing exactly what I was. Madison's friends saw me as the help, presentable enough for social events but never quite belonging to their world. Her brother Marcus made it clear I was temporary, a placeholder, until Madison came to her senses. But Madison herself was different when we were alone. Away from her family's expectations and her friends' judgments, she was funny, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable. She'd curl up next to me while I helped her with her economics homework, her head on my shoulder as she fell asleep to the sound of my voice explaining market theories. She'd seek me out after nightmares, climbing into my bed like a child seeking comfort. I told myself those moments were real, when she'd smile at me over breakfast, when she'd grab my hand during scary movies, when she'd defend me to her cruel friends. I convinced myself it meant something. That beneath the arrangement, beneath the contract, something genuine was growing between us. I threw myself into the role with devastating commitment. I learned her favorite foods, her fears, her dreams. I memorized her schedule, anticipated her needs, became indispensable to her daily life. I managed her social calendar, helped her through her college courses, and provided the emotional stability she'd never had from Alexander's chaotic attention. The sex was part of the arrangement too, though the contract had been carefully worded to avoid anything too explicit. Madison treated physical intimacy like another service I provided, something she expected when she needed comfort or validation. I told myself it was making love, but deep down I knew the truth. It was just another way I was being used. Still, I stayed. Through Madison's mood swings, her family's condescension, and the constant reminders that I didn't belong in their world. I stayed because I loved her, because I believed that somehow, someday, she would choose me for real. I gave up my finance dreams, turned down job offers, and poured every ounce of my energy into being the perfect boyfriend for a woman who was paying me to play the part. The house itself became a prison of beautiful memories. The music room where Madison would play piano while I studied nearby. The kitchen where I'd cook her favorite meals while she chatted about her day. The bedroom we shared, where I'd hold her while she slept, imagining a future where the contract didn't exist, where we were just two people who'd found each other. But reality had a way of intruding on fantasies. Madison's friends' cruel jokes about her charity case boyfriend, her family's constant reminders that I should be grateful for the opportunity they'd given me. The way Madison herself would dismiss me when more important people were around, treating me like furniture that could be safely ignored. I'd lie awake at night, watching Madison sleep, wondering who I'd become. The ambitious young man with big dreams had been replaced by someone whose entire identity revolved around making another person happy. Someone who measured his worth by how well he could anticipate Madison's needs, how smoothly he could handle her problems, how invisible he could make himself when she needed space for her real life. Alexander Sterling returned on a Tuesday morning in October, driving up the Blackwood Estate's circular driveway in a red Ferrari that announced his presence like a war horn. I watched from Madison's bedroom window as he emerged from the car, all casual confidence and inherited charm, his dark hair perfectly tousled and his smile as dangerous as I remembered. Madison dropped her coffee cup, the porcelain shattering against the marble floor, as she rushed to the window beside me. The sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, 5 years of longing compressed into a single breath. "Alex," she whispered, and in that moment, I knew I'd already lost her. The reunion happened in the main foyer, with me standing awkwardly to the side like a servant waiting for orders. Alexander swept Madison into his arms as if no time had passed, spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy I'd never been able to inspire. When he set her down, his hands lingered on her waist, and she didn't pull away. "God, Maddie, you're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, his voice carrying that practiced charm that had always worked on her. "I've missed you every single day." "You never called," she accused, but there was no real anger in it, just the breathless excitement of having her obsession returned to her. "I was building something worthy of you," he replied smoothly. "The music thing didn't work out, but I'm ready now, ready to be the man you deserve." I cleared my throat, a sound that felt deafening in the sudden silence. Madison startled as if she'd forgotten I existed. "Oh, Alex, this is Ethan," she said, her voice strangely flat. "Ethan, you remember Alexander Sterling?" Alexander's smile was sharp as broken glass as he extended his hand. "Of course, the boyfriend." The way he said it made it clear he knew exactly what I was. "Thanks for keeping my seat warm." That first day set the pattern for everything that followed. Madison began canceling our plans, disappearing for hours at a time with Alexander. When I asked where they'd been, she'd give vague answers about catching up and reminiscing about old times. She started dressing differently, wearing the kind of clothes that had always been reserved for special occasions, spending hours on her appearance before meeting him. The changes weren't just in how she looked, but in how she acted around me. The casual intimacy we'd shared evaporated overnight. She stopped seeking my comfort, stopped including me in her thoughts, stopped looking at me like I mattered. I became background noise in my own relationship, someone to handle the boring details while she pursued what really interested her. "Can you reschedule my meeting with the foundation board?" she'd ask without looking up from her phone, where she was texting Alexander. "Alex wants to show me this new restaurant downtown." "What about the charity gala planning?" I'd respond. "You said it was important." "You can handle it," she'd say dismissively. "You know what I like." The worst part was watching her transform around Alexander. The Madison I'd known was often tired, stressed, weighed down by family expectations and the pressure to be perfect. But with Alexander, she became luminous, electric, alive in ways I'd never seen. She'd throw her head back and laugh at his jokes, touch his arm while they talked, look at him like he held the secrets to the universe. I'd convinced myself over the years that Madison's distance was just her personality, that the occasional warmth she showed me was the best she could offer anyone, but seeing her with Alexander proved how wrong I'd been. She was capable of passion, of devotion, of the kind of love that transformed people. She'd just never felt it for me. The dinner party was when everything came crashing down. Madison had invited Alexander over to properly introduce him to the family, though it was clear he'd always been more family than I ever was. I'd spent the day helping prepare, choosing wines, arranging flowers, playing the perfect host for an event celebrating my own replacement. Alexander regaled the table with stories of his time in Europe trying to make it as a musician, painting himself as a romantic figure who'd been pursuing his dreams. The family hung on every word, asking questions about his experiences, his plans now that he was back. No one asked me anything. "The music scene in Berlin was incredible," Alexander was saying. "But I realized I was running from what really mattered. From who really mattered." His eyes found Madison's across the table. "Some things are worth more than dreams." Madison blushed, actually blushed, in a way she never had for me. "Alex always was dramatic," she said, but she was glowing. "So, what are your plans now?" William Blackwood asked, and I could hear the approval in his voice that had never been there when he spoke to me. "Taking over the family investment firm," Alexander replied. "Sterling Associates has been in our family for 4 generations. It's time I stepped up to my responsibilities." The conversation continued around me as if I wasn't there. Plans for Alexander's return to society, speculation about his future, reminiscences about his and Madison's childhood together. I sat in the chair I'd occupied for 5 years, eating food I'd helped select, listening to them plan a future that didn't include me. After dinner, I found Alexander alone on the terrace, smoking and looking out over the estate grounds with the satisfaction of someone surveying his domain. "Beautiful place," he said without turning around. "I've missed it." "Madison seems happy you Rebecca," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Madison never got over me, you know. Oh, I'm sure she's fond of you. You've been useful, keeping her occupied while I figured out my life, but let's not pretend this was ever real." "You don't know anything about what we have," I said, but the words felt hollow even to me. Don't I? He turned to face me, his smile cruel. I know her father paid you to play house with his daughter. I know you've been nothing more than an expensive babysitter for 5 years, and I know that now that I'm back, your services are no longer required. He took a long drag of his cigarette before continuing. Madison's been mine since we were children. This little interlude with you was just her way of waiting for me to grow up. Now I have, and it's time for you to step aside. The dismissal in his voice, the casual cruelty of it, hit me like a physical blow. But what was worse was the knowledge that he was right. Madison had been his first, and apparently, she was still his now. I'd just been keeping his place warm, exactly as he'd said. That night, I lay in bed listening to Madison laugh with Alexander in the garden below our window, their voices carrying on the night air like music I'd never be able to play. She hadn't come to bed at her usual time, too caught up in reliving old memories with the only man she'd ever really loved. I stared at the ceiling and finally admitted what I'd known from the moment Alexander's car pulled into the driveway. My 5 years as Madison Blackwood's boyfriend were over. The only question now was whether I'd leave with my dignity intact or let them destroy what little remained of the man I used to be. The nights became my enemy, stretching endlessly while I lay awake listening to Madison's laughter drift up from whatever room she was occupying with Alexander. Sleep became elusive, replaced by the torturous replay of every moment from the past 5 years, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that might have prepared me for this devastating revelation. I'd find myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m, staring at a face I barely recognized. Where was the confident young man who'd graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Business School? Where was the dreamer who'd planned to revolutionize corporate finance, who'd written detailed business plans for his own investment firm? The man looking back at me was hollow-eyed, defeated, a shadow of someone else's life. The worst part wasn't even Madison's betrayal, it was the slow, creeping realization of my own complicity in my destruction. I'd taken William Blackwood's money and convinced myself I was helping his daughter, but really, I'd been buying into my own imprisonment. Every deposit into my account had been another bar on the cage I'd built around my dreams. During the day, I'd walk through the mansion like a ghost, maintaining the routines that had once given my life structure. I'd prepare Madison's breakfast, only to watch her text Alexander while ignoring the perfectly arranged meal I'd made according to her exact specifications. I'd organize her schedule, knowing that every appointment would be cancelled the moment Alexander suggested an alternative. I'd select her clothes, understanding that she'd change into something more appealing the second she knew she'd see him. The library became my refuge, the place where I'd go to remember who I used to be. Surrounded by economics textbooks and finance journals, I'd read about market innovations and corporate strategies, feeling my abandoned dreams stir like ghosts. My old notebooks were still there, filled with business plans and investment theories I'd developed before Madison became my entire world. The handwriting looked foreign now, like messages from a stranger who'd once shared my body. I started researching quietly, using the estate's computer late at night when everyone was asleep. London School of Economics had a renowned MBA program. Harvard Business School offered executive education for career changers. Wharton had connections to the investment firms I'd once dreamed of joining. Each website I visited felt like a betrayal of the life I'd committed to, but also like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The physical symptoms of my emotional disintegration began manifesting in ways I couldn't hide. My hands would shake during simple tasks, muscle memory betraying the anxiety that gnawed at me constantly. I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, my appetite disappearing along with my sense of purpose. The household staff began looking at me with pity, which was somehow worse than their previous indifference. Madison's transformation around Alexander was the cruelest torture of all. I'd watch her become animated, passionate, alive in ways that 5 years of my devoted attention had never achieved. She'd spend hours getting ready to see him, trying on outfit after outfit, asking my opinion with the casual thoughtlessness of someone asking a servant to validate their choices. "Does this make me look too eager?" she'd ask, twirling in a designer dress that cost more than most people made in a month. "You look beautiful," I'd reply automatically, the words I'd said thousands of times before, now tasting like ash in my mouth. "Alex always loved me in blue," she'd continue, not really listening to my response. "He used to say it brought out my eyes." Each reference to their shared past was a knife twisted in an already mortal wound. They had inside jokes I'd never understand, memories that stretched back to childhood, a connection forged over decades that my 5 years of devotion could never match. I was the interloper in their story, the temporary obstacle they'd overcome. The paranoia began creeping in around the 3rd week of Alexander's return. I'd catch staff members whispering and wonder if they were talking about my inevitable departure. I'd notice William Blackwood looking at me with something that might have been sympathy or anticipation, and I'd question whether he'd already made arrangements for my replacement. Was there another desperate young man somewhere, signing a contract to be Madison's next companion? I started having dreams about my mother, who died 2 years ago despite all the treatments my Blackwood money had funded. In these dreams, she'd look at me with disappointment, asking what I'd done with the life she'd sacrificed so much to preserve. I'd try to explain about love, about loyalty, about the commitment I'd made, but the words would turn to dust in my mouth. The financial records became an obsession. I'd review my bank statements obsessively, calculating exactly how much William Blackwood had paid for 5 years of my life. $250,000, plus room and board, plus healthcare, plus the graduate school fund that would never be used because I'd traded my ambitions for the illusion of love. The math was simple and devastating, each figure a marker of my willing participation in my own destruction. I began timing Madison's absences, documenting the hours she spent with Alexander versus the minutes she spent acknowledging my existence. The data was depressingly clear. Our relationship had become a business transaction where I provided services and she consumed tickets. Without gratitude or awareness, I was the hired help, nothing more, nothing less. The most dangerous thoughts came in the quiet moments, when I'd imagine confronting them both, demanding acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed, forcing Madison to admit that she'd used me. But even in my fantasies, I knew the truth. She'd never seen it as using me because she'd never seen me as real. I was a function, not a person, a service, not a partner. The breaking point approached like a storm on the horizon. I could feel it building in the tension between my ribs, in the way my heart raced when I heard Alexander's voice, in the careful way I'd begun organizing my personal possessions. The few things that were truly mine, not purchased with Blackwood money or chosen to fit into Madison's world, fit easily into a single suitcase. Late at night, I'd stand at the window overlooking the estate gardens and imagine walking away. Just leaving, without explanations or confrontations or the messy business of untangling 5 years of intertwined lives. In these moments, I could almost taste freedom, could almost remember what it felt like to make decisions based on my own desires rather than Madison's needs. But then morning would come, and I'd find myself making her coffee exactly the way she liked it, and the fantasy would fade into the familiar rhythm of servitude. Because despite everything, despite the contract and the money and the clear evidence that I meant nothing to her, I was still hoping for a miracle, still believing that somehow, some way, Madison would choose me over Alexander. The delusion was killing me slowly, but I couldn't seem to let it go, not yet, not until the last possible moment when even I couldn't pretend anymore that this was love rather than the extended purchase of a human heart. The call came at 2 a.m, piercing through my restless half-sleep like a siren. Madison's name flashed on my phone screen, and despite everything, my heart raced with concern. After 3 weeks of being largely ignored, her reaching out in the middle of the night had to mean something was wrong. "Ethan!" Her voice was slurred, panicked, with music and shouting in the background. "I need help, there's been an accident." I was out of bed and dressed before she finished explaining. Alexander had been driving her back from some exclusive club in Manhattan when his Ferrari hit a patch of ice and spun into a concrete barrier. Neither was seriously injured, but Alexander had been drinking, the car was totaled, and there were already photographers at the scene, drawn by the sound of expensive metal meeting unforgiving stone. "Don't call my father," Madison begged as I drove through the empty streets toward the city. "Please, Ethan, you know how he gets about publicity, just help me handle this quietly." This was what I lived for, I realized with sick clarity. The moments when Madison needed me, when I could prove my worth by solving her problems and protecting her from consequences. It was the foundation of our entire relationship, the reason William Blackwood had hired me in the first place. I was the cleanup crew for his daughter's poor decisions. The accident scene was chaos. Alexander's Ferrari was crumpled against the barrier like expensive origami, steam rising from its destroyed engine. Police cars and an ambulance created a light show of red and blue against the night sky, while photographers circled like vultures, their cameras flashing constantly. I found Madison sitting in the back of an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders and tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't crying from pain or shock, she was crying because Alexander was in the police car, facing potential charges for driving under the influence, and she was more concerned about his reputation than the fact that they could have both died. His family will disown him if this gets out, she sobbed as I sat beside her. The Sterling name can't handle another scandal. You have to fix this, Ethan. You always know what to do. The familiar request should have motivated me to action, should have triggered the protective instincts I'd honed over 5 years of managing Madison's crises. Instead, I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Here she was, asking me to save the man who was trying to replace me, expecting me to use my connections and abilities to protect her real love while treating me like a convenient tool. "What about your injuries?" I asked quietly. "The paramedic said you might have a concussion." "I'm fine," she dismissed impatiently. "Alexander is the one who needs help right now. Can you call that lawyer friend of yours, the one who handles celebrity cases?" I made the calls, because it was what I'd been trained to do. I contacted the lawyer, arranged for the towing service, spoke with the police officers, and managed the photographers with a combination of charm and carefully placed bribes. Within 2 hours, Alexander was released on his own recognizance, the accident was being handled as a simple traffic incident, and the photos were being suppressed. Through it all, Madison never left Alexander's side. She held his hand while he gave his statement, brought him coffee while we waited for the paperwork, and fussed over a small cut on his forehead as if it were a life-threatening wound. I was the one handling the crisis, but she was comforting him. As dawn broke over the city, we finally returned to the estate. Alexander, exhausted and shaken, retired immediately to the guest room that had become his unofficial residence. Madison walked him upstairs, her arm around his waist, whispering reassurances about how everything would be fine now. I stood in the foyer, still in the clothes I'd thrown on hours earlier, feeling the weight of absolute clarity settle over me. This was my life. This was what I'd sold my soul for. The privilege of being Madison's emergency contact, her problem solver, her emotional support system for someone else's relationship. "Thank you." Madison's voice came from behind me as she descended the stairs. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The gratitude in her voice was real, but it was the same tone she'd used to thank a particularly helpful waiter or an efficient mechanic. Professional appreciation for services rendered. "You would have figured something out," I replied, not turning around. "You always do." "Are you okay?" she asked, and for a moment I almost believed she cared about the answer. "I'm tired," I said, which was true in ways she couldn't comprehend. "Why don't you take tomorrow off?" she suggested. "Sleep in, relax. I'll probably spend the day making sure Alex is okay anyway." There it was. The casual dismissal, the assumption that my world revolved around her convenience, the complete lack of awareness that I might have needs or feelings beyond my function as her personal assistant. I was being given permission to rest, so I'd be ready for the next crisis, the next cleanup, the next opportunity to prove my usefulness. That afternoon, while Madison tended to Alexander's wounded pride and minor injuries, I sat in William Blackwood's study with the original contract spread between us on his mahogany desk. The terms were clear, the expectations laid out in legal language that left no room for romantic delusions. "I'd like to invoke the termination clause," I said calmly, pointing to Section 12 of the agreement. 60 days notice, as specified. William studied me over his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. "This is about the Sterling boy." "This is about honoring our original agreement," I corrected. "Madison has successfully graduated, established herself professionally, and reconnected with her childhood friend. The objective has been achieved." "She depends on you," he said quietly. "She depends on the services I provide," I replied. "I'm sure you can hire someone else to manage her calendar and handle her emergencies." He was quiet for a long time, signing the termination papers with the same businesslike efficiency he'd shown when hiring me 5 years earlier. No emotional appeals, no attempts to negotiate. We both understood that this had always been a transaction with a beginning, middle, and end. "Your graduate school funding remains available," he said as I prepared to leave. "It was part of our arrangement." "Thank you, but I'll handle my own education from now on," I replied. I wanted nothing more from the Blackwood family, no ties that could bind me to this chapter of my life. The hardest part was the termination agreement I'd prepared for Madison. It was simple, straightforward, and final. A document that would legally end our fake relationship and free us both from any lingering obligations. I'd included a clause that would prevent either of us from discussing the nature of our arrangement publicly, protecting both her reputation and my privacy. I found her in the music room, playing piano, while Alexander dozed on the couch nearby. The scene was painfully domestic, a preview of the life she'd build with him once I was gone. She looked up when I entered, smiling automatically until she saw the papers in my hand. "What's this?" she asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew. "A formality," I said, placing the documents on the piano bench beside her. "Just some legal paperwork that needs your signature." She glanced at the heading, and I saw the moment of recognition flash across her face, but Alexander stirred on the couch, making a soft sound of contentment, and her attention immediately shifted back to him. "Can this wait?" she asked, already turning away from me. "Alex has been having nightmares about the accident. I don't want to wake him." "Of course," I replied, "whenever it's convenient." She signed the papers 2 days later without reading them, distracted by wedding magazines she was browsing for Alexander's sister's upcoming ceremony. Her signature was quick, careless, the same way she'd signed thank you cards and charity event programs over the years. With that signature, Madison Blackwood officially ended our 5-year relationship without ever realizing what she was signing. The poetic justice of it was almost beautiful. She'd dismissed me the same way she'd dismissed everything else that wasn't directly related to Alexander Sterling. I was finally free, and she didn't even notice. 4 years later, I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Hotel in Manhattan, adjusting my Italian silk tie and checking the time on my Patek Philippe watch. The quarterly investors' conference for Sterling Associates was beginning in an hour, and as the CEO of Rivers Capital Management, I was scheduled to present our newest acquisition strategy to an audience that included some of the most powerful financial minds in the country. The irony wasn't lost on me that Alexander Sterling's family firm had invited my company to speak at their premier event. My assistant, the brilliant and unflappable Isabella Chen, stood beside me reviewing last-minute details of our presentation. She was everything Madison had never been: genuinely intelligent, professionally accomplished, and completely devoted to our shared success. "The Blackwood Industries portfolio is showing significant weakness in their tech investments," Isabella murmured, her fingers flying across her tablet. "If your projections are correct, they'll be looking for new management within the quarter." I smiled, remembering the days when I'd helped Madison with her basic economics homework while she complained about how boring business was. Now her family's company was struggling while mine had become one of the fastest-growing investment firms on the East Coast. Success, I'd learned, was indeed the best revenge. The conference room was buzzing with conversation when we entered, financial titans networking over champagne and caviar. I recognized several faces from Forbes covers, Wall Street Journal profiles, and congressional hearings. These were the people I'd once dreamed of joining, the elite circle I'd abandoned for 5 years of playing house with Madison Blackwood. Then I saw her. Madison sat at a corner table, looking smaller and less vibrant than I remembered. Her honey-colored hair was shorter now, style in a conservative bob that made her appear older. The designer dress she wore was expensive but conservative, the kind of outfit chosen to project competence rather than beauty. She was alone, scrolling through her phone with the distracted air of someone trying to look busy. "Ethan Rivers." The voice made me turn, and I found myself face to face with Alexander Sterling. He'd aged poorly, his once boyish charm replaced by the soft features and slight paunch of a man who'd never had to work hard for anything. His smile was strained as he extended his hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Alexander," I replied cordially, noting how his handshake was weaker than I remembered. "How's married life treating you?" His wedding to Sophia Caldwell had been front-page news in the society papers 2 years ago, the union of 2 prominent families, though rumors suggested it was more about merging assets than hearts. Alexander's reputation for unreliability had caught up with him eventually, and Sophia's father had demanded significant concessions before agreeing to the match. "Can't complain," he said, "but there was no joy in it. Though I imagine you're doing well for yourself, Rivers Capital has quite the reputation." Before I could respond, Madison appeared at Alexander's side as if materialized from thin air. The shock in her green eyes was almost comical as she took in my appearance, the perfectly tailored suit, the confident posture, the expensive watch, and Isabella standing supportively beside me. "Ethan," she breathed, and I heard 5 years of assumptions crumble in that single word. Madison, I replied politely, as if greeting any other business acquaintance. You look well. She didn't. Up close, I could see the lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her champagne glass, and there was a desperate quality to her smile that reminded me uncomfortably of how I used to look at her. I didn't know you were in finance, she stammered. When you left, I thought. You thought what? I asked calmly, genuinely curious about what story she'd told herself about my disappearance. I thought you'd gone back to school, she said. Your undergraduate degree was in finance, wasn't it? I remember helping you study. The revision of history was breathtaking. She remembered helping me study when the reality was that I'd spent 5 years tutoring her through basic business courses while abandoning my own academic dreams. But I didn't correct her. There was no point in relitigating the past with someone who'd never understood it in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced over the sound system, please take your seats, we're about to begin. The presentation went flawlessly. Isabella and I moved through our slides with practiced precision, outlining Rivers Capital's strategy for identifying undervalued assets and transforming struggling companies through targeted investments. The audience was engaged, asking sharp questions that I answered with the confidence of someone who'd spent 4 years rebuilding himself from the ground up. During the Q&A session, I noticed Madison watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize it. Respect. Professional admiration for someone she was finally seeing as an equal rather than a convenient accessory. After the presentation, she approached me with the determined stride of someone who'd been gathering courage. That was impressive, she said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. Your company's growth has been remarkable. Thank you, I replied, though I imagine Sterling Associates has its own success stories to share. Alexander, who'd been hovering nearby, let out a bitter laugh. Not lately. The family business isn't what it used to be. There was a story there, I realized, the golden boy who'd returned to claim. His inheritance had apparently not lived up to expectations. Alexander's failure to properly manage the Sterling portfolio was well known in certain circles, though I'd been too busy building my own empire to pay much attention to his struggles. Ethan, Madison said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of desperation I recognized all too well. Could we talk privately? Isabella caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. She'd heard enough about my past to understand the significance of this moment. I'll be at the bar, she said diplomatically. Take your time. Madison led me to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, away from the conference crowds. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She seemed to be struggling with where to begin, her confident facade cracking to reveal the uncertainty beneath. I owe you an apology, she said finally, for how things ended between us. Do you? I asked, genuinely curious. What exactly are you apologizing for? The question seemed to throw her off balance. For not appreciating what we had, for taking you for granted, for choosing Alexander over you when you'd been nothing but loyal and supportive. It was a pretty speech, but it revealed how little she still understood about our relationship. She was apologizing for hurting my feelings, not for using me. She saw our breakup as a romantic tragedy rather than the end of a business arrangement. Madison, I said gently, we never had anything to take for granted. Your father paid me to be your boyfriend. It was a job, nothing more. The color drained from her face. That's not. It wasn't just about the money. You loved me. I know you did. I thought I did, I admitted. But I was 22 and desperate. And I convinced myself that what I felt was love rather than gratitude for the opportunity to survive. But we were happy, she insisted, her voice rising slyly. There were real moments between us, real feelings. There were moments when I forgot what I was being paid to do, I corrected, but they were never real for you, were they? You were always waiting for Alexander to come back. She started to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. It doesn't matter anymore, I continued. That was a different life, a different version of both of us. I'm grateful for the experience because it taught me what I was capable of achieving when I finally decided to pursue my own dreams instead of enabling someone else's. I made a mistake, she said desperately. Alexander and it didn't work out the way I thought it would. He's not the man I remembered. The marriage was arranged by our families, and now we're all trapped in contracts and obligations and... She was spiraling, I realized. the same way she used to when things didn't go according to her plans, when the world refused to arrange itself around her desires. In the past, this would have been my cue to step in, to fix whatever was broken, to sacrifice my own needs to make her comfortable. Instead, I checked my watch. "I should get back," I said calmly. "Isabella and I have dinner reservations." "Wait." Madison grabbed my arm, her fingers desperate against my sleeve. "Please. I know I don't deserve it, but I need help. The family business is struggling, and Alexander's decisions have made everything worse. I've been trying to hold things together, but I don't know how to fix this." There it was, the real reason for her apology, her sudden recognition of my worth. Madison Blackwood needed something from me, just like old times. The only difference was that now she had to ask instead of simply expecting me to anticipate her needs. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "You always were resourceful when it mattered." "Ethan, please," she begged, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young woman who used to cry on my shoulder when Alexander ignored her. "I know I treated you badly, I know I didn't appreciate what I had, but I'm asking for help as a friend." "We were never friends, Madison," I said quietly. "We were employer and employee. The arrangement ended when you signed the termination papers 4 years ago." She stared at me as if I'd struck her. "You've changed." "I've grown up," I replied. "It was long overdue." Isabella appeared at my elbow, her timing perfect as always. "Ready for dinner?" she asked, sliding her arm through mine with natural affection. I nodded, then looked back at Madison one final time. "Good luck with everything," I said sincerely. "I hope you find what you're looking for." As we walked away, I could feel Madison watching us go. There was something final about that moment, like closing the cover of a book I'd finished reading years ago. The young man who'd loved her desperately, who'd sacrificed everything for the illusion of being needed, was truly dead. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who understood the difference between being valued and being used. Isabella squeezed my arm as we reached the hotel entrance. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I considered the question seriously. Madison Blackwood had been the defining relationship of my early 20s, the person around whom I'd shaped my identity for 5 crucial years. Seeing her again should have stirred up old feelings, old resentments, old longings. Instead, I felt nothing but a mild curiosity about the choices that had led her to this moment. She was no longer the golden goddess I'd worshipped from afar, no longer the cruel princess who'd dismissed my devotion. She was just another struggling businesswoman trying to save a failing company, no different from dozens of others I encountered in my professional life. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." 6 months after the conference, I stood in the executive boardroom of Rivers Capital Management, overlooking Central Park through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected my satisfied smile. The acquisition document spread across the mahogany table told a story of perfect, poetic justice. Blackwood Industries was now a wholly owned subsidiary of my company. William Blackwood sat across from me, his signature still wet on the papers that transferred control of his family's century-old business to the young man he'd once hired to babysit his daughter. The irony was so beautiful, it felt scripted by a benevolent universe with a sense of humor. "The transition will be seamless," I assured him, my voice professionally courteous. "We have no intention of dismantling what your family built. Your employees will be retained, your company culture preserved." It was true, though not entirely altruistic. Blackwood Industries still had valuable assets and experienced personnel. The company had simply been mismanaged by a family more interested in social status than sound business practices. Under Rivers Capital's guidance, it would thrive again. "And Madison?" William asked quietly, the question carrying the weight of paternal concern. "Will remain as creative director," I replied. "Her position is secure." What I didn't mention was that creative director was essentially a meaningless title with no real authority. Madison would have an office, a salary, and the illusion of importance, but all major decisions would flow through my hand-selected management team. It was, in its own way, a return to our original dynamic, except now I held all the power. Alexander Sterling's fate had been decided months earlier. His disastrous management of the Sterling Associates portfolio had finally caught up with him, and the family firm had been forced into bankruptcy. The man who'd once dismissed me as a temporary obstacle had lost everything except his marriage to Sophia Caldwell, which had become a prison of mutual resentment and financial dependence. Isabella found me in my office that evening, reviewing the final integration plans for Blackwood Industries. She carried 2 glasses of champagne and wore the satisfied expression of someone who'd helped orchestrate a masterpiece. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood," she said with a wicked smile, using the old name with deliberate irony. "That's Mr. Rivers to you," I corrected, accepting the champagne. "Though I suppose I am technically William Blackwood's boss now." We toasted to success, to justice, and to the beautiful symmetry of life's unexpected reversals. 4 years ago, I'd been Madison's hired companion, grateful for whatever scraps of attention she threw my way. Now her family's survival depended on my continued goodwill. The intercom buzzed, interrupting our celebration. "Mr. Rivers," my assistant announced, "Ms. Blackwood is here to see you. She says it's urgent." I wasn't surprised. The acquisition had been announced that morning, and Madison had probably spent the day processing the implications. I nodded to Isabella, who diplomatically excused herself, leaving me alone to face this final conversation. Madison entered my office like a woman walking to her execution, her professional composure barely concealing the desperation beneath. She'd dressed carefully for this meeting, I noticed. The navy suit was expensive and perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, her hair styled to perfection. She was armoring herself with beauty and elegance, the weapons that had once been so effective against me. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you," I replied politely, not rising from my chair or offering her a seat, small gestures that established the new hierarchy between us. She remained standing, probably because sitting would have required an invitation I wasn't offering. "I wanted to discuss my role in the transition process. I have ideas for streamlining operations, and I think my knowledge of the company's history could be valuable." It was a reasonable request delivered with professional composure, but I could see the desperation lurking behind her green eyes. Madison Blackwood was fighting for relevance in a world where she no longer held any cards. "Your insights will certainly be considered," I said neutrally, "though most operational decisions will be handled by our existing management structure." The dismissal was gentle but absolute. Madison had played this game with me for 5 years, offering just enough hope to keep me compliant while never granting me real authority. Now I was returning the favor with interest. "Ethan," she said, abandoning her professional facade, "we need to talk, really talk, about what happened between us, about what this means for—" "This is a business transaction," I interrupted smoothly. "Nothing more. Personal history has no place in corporate restructuring." The echo of my own words from years past hung in the air between us. This was how she'd dismissed our relationship when Alexander returned, reducing 5 years of my life to a simple business arrangement. Now I was doing the same to her family's legacy. "Please," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I know I hurt you. I know I was selfish and blind and stupid, but this isn't just about me. My father built this company from nothing. It's his life's work. And now it will be preserved and enhanced under professional management," I replied. "Your father should be grateful that we're preventing the complete collapse that was inevitable under the current leadership." It was true, though brutally stated. Alexander's involvement in Blackwood Industries' investment strategy had been disastrous, and Madison's attempts to compensate for his failures had only accelerated the company's decline. The acquisition was genuinely their best option, even if the identity of the acquirer added salt to the wound. Madison moved closer to my desk, her composure finally cracking completely. "I was wrong about everything," she said urgently. "About Alexander, about us, about what really mattered. I've spent 4 years regretting every choice I made, wishing I could take it all back." "Regret is unproductive," I said calmly. "The past can't be changed, only learned from." "But the future can be," she countered desperately. "We could have a second chance. I'm different now. I understand what I lost, what I threw away for a fantasy that was never real." The irony was perfect. Madison Blackwood, who'd once treated me like a servant competing for her attention, was now offering herself to me like a prize I might still want to claim. She'd learned nothing from our history, still believing that her beauty and charm could manipulate me into abandoning my own interests for hers. "I'm engaged," I said simply, the words cutting through her desperate pitch like a sword. She froze, the color draining from her face as she processed this information. "Engaged to Isabella Chen," I continued, enjoying the way Madison's eyes widened with recognition. "We'll be married next month. You'll receive an invitation, of course, as a valued employee." The cruelty of that last comment was intentional and perfectly calibrated. Madison would be invited to watch me marry someone else, to witness my happiness with a woman who valued me genuinely, to sit among the corporate guests and remember what It felt like to be the center of my universe. Does she know? Madison asked quietly. About us, about what we had. She knows about the contract, I replied truthfully. Isabella appreciates directness in all things, including relationship history. Madison flinched as if I'd slapped her. The word contract still had the power to wound, to remind her that our entire relationship had been a business transaction she'd been too self-absorbed to recognize. I should go, she said finally, her defeat complete. That would be best, I agreed. HR will be in touch about your transition schedule and new responsibilities. She walked to the door with as much dignity as she could muster, but paused with her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, she said without turning around, I did love you. In my own selfish, stupid way, I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone else. I just didn't realize it until it was too late. The confession hung in the air after she left, and I considered whether it changed anything. Madison might have finally recognized the value of what she'd discarded, but recognition without the possibility of redemption was just another form of punishment. She would spend the rest of her life knowing exactly what she'd lost and why she could never get it back. 3 months later, Isabella and I stood at the altar of St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue, exchanging vows in front of Manhattan's financial and social elite. The guest list was a who's who of corporate power, with senators, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries filling the pews. Madison sat in the back, alone, wearing a black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Which, in a way, she was. The ceremony marked the final death of any hope she might have harbored about reclaiming what we'd once had. During the reception at the Plaza Hotel, I watched her through the crowd as she made polite conversation with other guests, a smile brittle as glass. She left early, before the dancing began, slipping away like a ghost returning to whatever purgatory she'd created for herself. William Blackwood approached me during the father-daughter dance, his expression thoughtful as he watched Isabella and her father glide across the marble floor. She's lovely, he said, nodding toward my bride. You chose well. I learned from experience, I replied with subtle meaning. He understood the implication and nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I always thought highly of you. You were exactly what Madison needed, even if she was too young to appreciate it. Water under the bridge, I said diplomatically, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. As Isabella and I departed for our honeymoon in the Maldives, I caught a final glimpse of Madison standing alone on the hotel steps, watching our car disappear into the Manhattan traffic. The image was so perfectly symbolic that I almost laughed. She'd spent 5 years taking my devotion for granted, dismissing my love as insignificant, treating me like a convenient accessory to her real life. Now she could spend the rest of hers remembering what unconditional love felt like, and knowing she'd thrown it away for an illusion that had cost her everything. The plane lifted off from JFK Airport, carrying Isabella and me toward our future together, while somewhere below, Madison Blackwood began the long journey of living with the consequences of her choices. It was, I reflected with deep satisfaction, exactly the ending our story deserved. Justice, after all, was just another form of love.